Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Coffee Edition. Joining, per usual, my esteemed colleague and co host, the future governor of Virginia, TK Eppley. I'm coming live today from the Carmichael Hotel in Carmel, Indiana. So it's off a little bit on that studio side. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some superstitions and why routines may or may not matter. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid.
Guess who's back?
Good morning, TK.
Good morning, fine sir. How are you?
Good. I was actually a little pleasantly surprised. Most of the time when I have some hotel coffee, it's not very good, but this is actually, quite good. It's not that generic Starbucks. Also, not one of our sponsors.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah,
We're-
I
we're-
really don't need any
We're
big
going to have
companies.
trouble getting sponsored by anyone.
Yeah, I really don't want any of those big box companies to be a sponsor anyway. Like,
Well,
I
there you
feel
go.
like they,
So we're
I
good.
feel, yeah, I feel like they do more to harm people in the economy than they do good. Especially when things get a little bit rough. Like when that was a big thing, when at the height of COVID. I read an article like something like Starbucks was going to close 10,000 stores in North America. I'm like, what? Yeah, well, because no one's going to the different cities, so everyone's staying home. So we're just like, yeah, but I'm sure you probably had people still going there, and eventually they're going to come back. So it's just 10,000 stores gone. Like TGI Fridays and where I'm at in Indiana just closed up shop. Like, no, we're just
I think there were a lot of businesses, especially like retail food chains, right? Because the way people want to consume restaurant food has changed. Like all the buffets, like the Golden Corrals of the world and everything, are if they're not extinct, they're on their last leg. And certainly a lot of these, the low to medium end of the chain restaurants, a lot of those were on there. That especially a theme restaurant like TGIF or stuff like that. And what I've noticed traveling around is a lot of the TGIFs have gone out of business. There's Joe's Crab Shack was another one I think that contracted pretty greatly. But I think, after the 2008 crisis and up to COVID, the economy was very robust, so everybody starts really expanding, and I think some of them overdid it. And this was probably a good excuse to, financially right size or get out of the business. I think M&S, McCormick and Smith, I think they closed up. I mean, every place I go, and there used to be an M&S, it's not there anymore.
yeah. I can't tell you the last time I've seen an M&S.
Well, I'd wonder if the McCormick and Smith at National Harbor is still open.
Well, we're not there to keep them open,
Well,
so I'm pretty sure we were paying their rent for them.
that a lot of businesses, right? So, but that's I think when you get an event like the pandemic where there's, especially because there was federal money to help, you make it easy for people to come in and do the right thing to go out of business.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't mean that doing the right thing is the right thing. I'm saying that, probably if you look at the balance sheet, it's probably the right thing, but what's the net effect? I'd be interested to know what the percentage of like PPP fraud is. And I don't mean legitimate, just take the money and run, but just take the money, because everything was based on the previous year's numbers. So if your previous year's numbers with your employees was 100, and by the time you get your PPP loan, you already downsized to 50, what did you do with the balance of that cash? And most people probably put it back in the business or did whatever, but it still wasn't a directly legitimate way to do that, right? I wonder what that level of fraud and graft is.
Well, it was only supposed to be for smaller companies,
Right.
under a certain revenue size, and I would like to believe that it's in the normal standard deviation of just
A few percent here and there.
yeah. I would like to believe that,
Yeah.
but I think if I had to put a number on it, my over under would probably be 15%, which I think is extremely high.
Well, I also think, because the program was spawned in an instant, right? And when you went and did the paperwork, there was no room for comment. It was just filling in all the standard business information and then basically some basic numbers, and it decided that, right? And at the end of the first period of time for how they wanted to liquidate that money from the treasury, there was still a big bucket left over. And I had said to somebody, I go, that tells you they don't want to give the money away. It's not, the program was put in a fashion that wasn't designed just to go out and blanket help people. There's an agenda attached to that, because how many times a government program at the end of its at the end of when it's supposed to liquidate all the cash, they still have money left in the bank. They don't.
This government?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, USA, right? And so to me, that's when you look at okay, what was what's the where are we trying to get to in actuality with all that?
Well, maybe the Democrats are just not good counting numbers.
Here's the thing. I mean, it's tough to blame one party anymore. It really is. It is.
I blame all of them. It's all their fault.
I know. It's like
This is why you're going to be, when you're the governor of Virginia, you're gonna start changing the nation.
There's gonna have to be a massive write-in campaign, since I haven't spent one nickel.
No, well, Stoney and I got this covered.
Oh, perfect.
You have nothing to worry about.
You guys are on it. Great. That's what I need.
Yeah. we got all the SEO tags taken care of pretty soon. It's just.
So now I'm going to actually have to watch the results during the day, or I'll be like, I'll be in Ann Arbor working in other news. It'll be me going.
Well, I think the only picture we were able to find, though, really was one without the beard for you. So
yeah, because there's none out there that have that. Well, it's good because people won't know who I am when I show up, which probably is pretty good idea.
Well, and like I said, if I can get you elected when you didn't even want to get elected, then that just puts my status way up. Like
your campaign manager of the millennium.
Yeah. Nice. So the other day I was watching the Yankees game, and I found it somewhat funny as to how all of them are like jumping over the foul line, and it sort of reminded me of like Superstitions, and
Yep.
and in some of the cases, I'm like, okay, there's a routine might be someone's superstitions, but there's some weird ones in baseball, like can't touch the foul line. They a pitcher isn't supposed to shave on the day that he's going to be starting. You can't talk to him if he's throwing a no hitter or a perfect game. Like everyone's going to leave him alone, and I'm like, I would think that would put more pressure on me if like all of a sudden everyone's now not acting like they normally do. Like, oh, what's going on? So I wasn't sure if there's any in your time, because I mean you spent 200 years in the military. Over time, like what did the guys have superstitions? They have routines they needed to go through. Because the only one I found about the Navy was that you're not supposed to wash out your coffee mug.
That's a big one. And it's funny because some young industrious sailor one time was working in the chief's mess. When you're a junior sailor, like when you first get on the ship after you join the Navy after A school or whatever, the first 90 days you're going to spend working in the kitchen of some sort, right? Whether you're helping to cook, serve food, or whatever. And so it's broken down into 3 groups. You have the officer's mess, you have the chief's mess, and then you have the regular galley for the crew. And everybody wants to work in the chief's mess because the chiefs leave tips, right? We also don't have haphazard anatomy things showing up in your coffee cup or anything like that from sailors, which at least once a deployment on a ship, and I've only deployed on ships as a SEAL, so we kind of get the outside in view of what goes on. Is it shows up on the closed circuit TV that some young E3 was in the officer's mess, working over the cups, and next thing you know, he's in front of everybody, he's having money taken away and everything like that, right? He's going to non-judicial punishment, and the Chiefs don't have that because we tip out and we treat the kids with respect, and there's a lot of learning that goes on, right? While they're there, they get to hear a lot of what goes on in the Chiefs mess, and so for them it's a good learning experience. But some young industrious kid was in the Navy, been in the Navy less than 3 months, basically thought he'd do a good thing, and he went and cleaned all the coffee mugs in the Chiefs mess. And they have their names on. Everybody's got their name on it, right? And they actually wanted to take him to non-judicial punishment and fine him or do something to him because he went and cleaned all the coffee cups. And we're talking filthy, like black lined on the inside coffee cups, right? And I mean, and it goes back. I mean, there's, some that you would imagine, like you don't ever put clothing on from a dead guy. Like if somebody goes, you don't care what they have in their thing in their blinds, you don't want that, right? Most of them, I think, have kind of dissipated along the way, just because a lot of the traditions aren't the right word. A lot of the things that we used to do in the Navy have been, and some for very good reasons, had been watered down. Chief's initiation, now they don't call it initiation, they call it transition, right? And so there were a lot of things that happened at Chief's initiation that probably are inconsistent with good behavior today, right? However you define that. And so that doesn't happen, right? You had crossing the line ceremonies, like when you want to cross the equator, that was a lot of it was hazing, plain and simple. And then same, like when you got what they call it, I think it was called being a blue nose, when you went into either one of the Arctic circles, like when you crossed over the Arctic circles, right? The whole the whole idea of a shadow box when somebody retired is now like it's the vestiges of when a sailor went ashore for the last time off a ship, he got a foot locker and had mementos of his time in the military. And so that and whatever pay he got and everything like that. So it was just one stop. Here's your life in there. And that was a big part of, piping somebody ashore, because a lot of times it was, hey, your time in the Navy's done. If you want to, we're in some Pacific island somewhere. If you want to go back to the US, you've got to re-enlist or you get off the ship. Right. And this is, in the 1800s and leading up to that. Right. I think a lot of them are, the sailors things like Red Sky at Night, that kind of thing. But I think there's, some of it's good. There's a lot of tradition in the military that should be building for people. The whole process of becoming a chief in the Navy, right, I think is tradition, right, more than it is superstition. But there's a certain way that things are done, right? You build when it's announced that you're going to that you've made chief. You build a box, a wooden box with a lock, and it has a charge book, and it's a big notebook. And in there, you have a page for every what we call real chief, because before you're pinned, you're just a selectee. Every real chief, and they get to write something in the book. Now, I always would write something positive. I might joke them a little bit, but I would always write something positive. And for the most part, unless somebody has a legitimate problem with you that far precedes that moment in time, this was one of those traditions that was designed 100 plus years ago to help folks ramp up, right? And unlike in the Army, EH is another guy that picks up trash, right? Because they got a lot of them. Well, in the Navy, it's different, because if you have to go, everything is confined to ships. Right. And when we have thought process, the big thought process doesn't revolve around the SEAL community or the aviation community. They're all relatively new in the big picture. And they've adopted a lot of the same traditions because they're Navy wide. But because you'll never have enough officers on a naval ship to do all the tasks that warrant that special trust and confidence. And that's a big statement. And like when you get a commission as an officer, there'll never be enough thing. They have to impose that trust and confidence onto enlisted folks, which is why in the Navy, you go from the regular sailor suit with the white hat to khakis and an officer style uniform. Right. And it's that tradition of how we would get folks from being a junior person to a senior person. Now in the SEAL community, it's somewhat different. Like we had a lot of the support folks that came with us were very bound by that tradition. I thought a lot of it was good, and some of the guys are my best friends, and the they would be really stuck on, hey, you guys don't want to participate in all the, we used to call the reindeer games, like, that went on around it, right? And they're a big time consumer. And certainly after 9/11, it's like we were like, hey, we want to play along, but like we got work to do, right? And a lot of it is, and I talked to one of the guys. He retired as a force master chief, and realized the guy's name is Dave Carter. Great leader, just a great leader and a better human, right? And but he was really in, and he really loved the tradition of the Navy, and that he's like, and you guys aren't fully participating. And I'm like, Dave, for a lot of chiefs coming, a lot of regular Navy guys, this is the first thing they've ever been selected for, right? And that drives that behavior, right? Whereas for us, like the CEO of the command used to say back in the day, Admiral Wilson, when he was a CEO, he would say, look, I'm not going to be cavalier with y'all's lives, but every one of you volunteered at least and were selected at least for 6 different things to get here. Right. And so it's a different mindset. And one of the things we had to work with was getting guys not to goof on the process. Like we can't, at the time, we weren't fully participating in it. So how can you make fun of it? Right. But in there's a lot of that tradition. And I think when people say superstitions, a lot of times they mean tradition. Right. And some superstition, about the way people, you've seen people that, whether it's their OCD or whatever, and this is generic life. They say it's a superstition, but really what they're imposing some artificial discipline on themselves, right? In their mind, it's like, hey, because that old saying, discipline is freedom, right? You're not going to be motivated every day of the week, and discipline gets you past those days, right? Do I want to get up? Do I want to get out of bed? Do I want to go work out? Do I want to do all the things that I'm supposed to do every day of the week, right? And how much you can do that is how far you can traverse in life. Right. And I think that when you start talking about traditions of the military, and the Army has got, I don't even know, the Army's got stuff like, you're like, okay, what does that mean? Like, we really don't know. It's been done forever. Right. Yeah. But I think that's, Air Force is too young to have a whole bunch.
Yeah, I didn't see a whole lot from there, but I kind of, tend to agree with the aspect of superstitions being more about tradition and just a regiment.
Right.
Like for myself, I really do believe that the best thing to do first thing in the morning is start getting those wins, and making your bed is a win.
Right.
I had to completely change that routine because the missus doesn't like me making the bed while she's still in it. So that I had to find something else to start doing in the morning to get those wins, and I did. But I feel like those are things that I need to do every day.
Right.
Because it's the start of me having a minimal of a good day. And I think we've talked about it before. For me, the minimum I have to do to say I had a good day was to learn something new and to teach someone something new. And
right.
so
you and I are both the same in that aspect, right? That's I think early on in our friendship, that's one of the things that bound us together, was the fact that we want to learn something and we want to teach somebody something.
Yep. And I've always had people ask, like, well, why do you want to, why teach? And I said, well, it does 2 things. One, even if the person already knows it. Like I was talking to this young man at the bar who was like I don't know, maitre d or something, like he was, or a host or something. I don't know exactly what he was, but wasn't a waiter or a waitress. And I was telling him about this. I said, look, take a look at the bartender. So you don't know how to make a Manhattan. Go teach the bartender how to make a Manhattan. He goes, but he already knows how. I said, yes, but how do you know if you're doing it correct?
Right.
And so even the person that already knows it, if you teach that person, they can go, oh no, you need to do this.
Right.
Now you just learned something again, and then you just help that person fulfill teaching you something, because
Right.
you want other people to also be living that motto of teaching and continuing that cycle. He's like, that's great. And so I tend to, first thing in the morning, I use this app called Blinkist.
Yeah.
And I do that, 15 minutes, start, going through this, and if I like the 15-minute synopsis, then I'll buy the book.
Right.
But I don't want to waste my time on, hours of the book and going, I hate this, because once I buy a book, I have to
No
read it.
doubt. Right.
Um,
I think that
and some of them are more painful than others. So Blinkist saves me a lot of time if I learn something, and then buy the book. So within the first hour of me waking up, I can say I've learned something.
right. I'm to the point now where like I would gravitate, the books I traditionally gravitate towards. Now I'm starting to move into stuff that I wouldn't, and trying to find interest in some of those things to say, so you don't get so stovepiped into, hey, I'm always reading this kind of thing. Right. I mean, when I lived in England, I think I read 77 books in the 2 years I was there. Why? Because didn't have a television.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the coolest things I read was I did Schwarzkopf's book, and then I did Colin Powell's book, and then I followed it up. And this is shortly after the original Gulf War, right? And then I did God, what's his name? David Colonel. He's a retired Army colonel who was the most decorated soldier in Vietnam, and ended up he became a journalist later on. And you're talking about two, with Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell. You're talking two 4-star generals, one of which was more of a gruff warrior type, and the other was more of a statesman type. And then when you got uh, God, Colonel David, I'll think of his last name in a minute. He was an E1 who got a battlefield commission in Korea. And you look at, hey, what does West Point produce, and what does the battlefield produce, and what's adverse about it, and what's positive about it. And I thought that, to me, that was like, and those are like, big 800,000-page treatises about somebody's life. And you start looking and going, hey, people can get to the same place. It's the whole thing. It's like, just because we're on the same bus doesn't mean we're going to the same place.
Mhm.
And they were all going to the same place, but they were on different buses.
Yeah. There's always multiple ways to get to a location.
Right.
I talk. So when I do once a month at the credit union, I do an Ask Me Anything Monday, and I found that a lot of them don't necessarily like to ask a lot of questions.
Right.
So I kind of turned it more into a podcast like thing, and I would interview people at there. And so I convinced our CEO to let me interview them. And so uh, I was asking good questions such as what thing did you do growing up that you wind up getting in the most trouble for doing? Like
Right.
trying to also personalize that. People are like, look, here's a regular person. But where I really started diving in was that he had only finished his college degree like 4 years ago, and now he's CEO. He went all the way from a teller
Right.
to chief operating officer before actually having his degree. And I wanted to impress upon people that there's multiple paths. That
Right.
all that matters is, are you learning? Are you learning every day? Are you improving every day? And John, of course, definitely did. Um, and then that was able to dovetail at the same time, going, look, and now we're making it available to all employees, LinkedIn Learning.
Right.
And which I feel, I feel a little sad that we don't have more adoption into LinkedIn Learning right now. We're at about 25% of the company has signed up.
I think
Well,
that's one of those things that it takes a little bit of time, because you've got, it's just like anything else on that innovation curve. You've got early adopters all the way to laggards.
yeah.
And you climb up into into the people that are just, they're the mainstream consumer of whatever products thing, but they tend to wait a little bit. How long is it going to take before, people are, literally, metaphorically around the water cooler going, hey, I learned this is really cool. Right.
Mhm.
And I think that's, kind of, where's the tipping point with that? Right. But I think really what you're saying is, hey, we're looking for an advantage, right? What benefit? Because you can't always keep paying people more and stuff like that in the immediacy, but what benefit can I provide to somebody that's of great value? And whether it's you teaching them, or LinkedIn teaching them, or whomever, what's the value that I get? Right. And there's a guy, he was one of the early investors. He's an Indian guy. He's one of the early investors in Facebook. He's a billionaire now. And he talks about He talks about like mainstream education now, right? And he says he finds it very hard a lot of times to invest in companies that have what he calls to be good rule followers, right? And he goes, and those are the folks that were all A students, right? And he was in front of an audience of like Stanford MBA students, and he was saying, he goes, he's talking about how to keep an open mind and to really have an entrepreneurial spirit. And he goes, and it's very hard. He goes, you guys are the worst at it because you learn how to jump all the wickets to get that piece of paper. And he goes, and that's not lateral thinking. That's learning how to fit into the box with everybody else. And so what he says a lot of times, he goes, yeah, I'll want one of you at the company level. He goes, but you're usually not the visionary, right? Because there's knowledge and there's education. And we have a highly educated country for the most in the business world. How many knowledgeable people do we have? And it's guys like your CEO, even guys like me that got out of the military and said, hey, I'm going to start, and you start sharking your way up. Is like, what are those? How quickly can I translate my experiences into knowledge, right? And use those for things. And I think there's a baseline as a human that people have that get them to the point where they can show up and say, I can make a net positive effect, right? And being thankful for your experiences and having gratitude in front of other people is the easiest way to get everybody else to buy into what you're doing, right? Because and in that thankfulness, there's humility, because you're like, hey, I just didn't come upon this. I didn't wake up this morning and just know this, right? There's, now 35, 40 years of my life where in one way or another, I've gotten experiences, good and bad, right? And I always tell people, like, look, if you're working for a boss and there's great things, but there's really abjectly bad things, focus on what those are, right? Because I don't ever want to do those, right? And I tell people all the time, the older I get, I have a bigger list of things I'll never consider doing, because under no circumstance do they work for me. And in doing that, it'll frees me up to go look at new ideas, right? And accept criticism, accept construction from people, and then go, I know I'm not thinking the way that I should think about this, and getting out into the business itself. And I think one of the greatest questions that you can ask as a business leader is, hey, why are we doing it this way? Right? Why do we do it this way? Because I asked the question, like, one of the first week when I was at this company, and one of my direct reports, like, well, we don't want to do it that way. It's the way that we were told we had to do a thing. Okay, how do you want to do it? Right? And it was a very innovative, it's what I would have done if I sat down and thought about it long enough. I'm like, perfect, let's go do that. Right? It was their idea. Right? And it's all of the ideas should be theirs. Right? My job as a leader of a company is to break ties. Right? Actually, job number one is to empower everybody, give you as much authority as I can humanly give you, and give you the context of decision making for the company so that you can make great decisions and empower your people to make great decisions, and so on and so on. Right? And folks of you that have watched this podcast before know that's what I do. And it's how I truly believe it. But then it's saying, hey, I'm giving you all the accountability, right? And the direction and everything you need to do. Come back to me. When you guys come up with 2 or 3 good ideas, bring them to me and we'll break the tie. Right? Because as a leader, you're part-time cheerleader, you're part-time psychiatrist, you're every minute of your day is externally marketing to everybody what you do and why that's important, right? And more importantly, it's creating a positive attitude. Doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work. It doesn't mean you're not going to have disagreement, but it means that everybody's opinion is valued and that everybody's opinion is heard. And I said, like, I'm a big, when I talk diversity, I want diversity of thought, right? Because it's like nobody likes to be told they're wrong, but in the macro, like, I want to be told what I'm advocating isn't the best course of action. And then I want to see what is the best course of action. And strangely enough, once you start empowering people, a lot of times it's what people consider to be the most junior person because they're closest to the problem.
Absolutely. One of the things that I try to get folks to realize as well, in that they're going to say, as an example, we're having a lot of pushback in wanting to, continue the use of Chromebooks over laptops. One costs Two, there's a security benefit. But I'm going, you're just using the Chromebook to VDI into a Windows 10. So it shouldn't matter what you're using. Well, a lot of my people I've found that they really don't know how to use a Chromebook, and so they get nervous about it. So like, oh, that's not going to work. And I started asking with in any of these kind of things, well, what if it does work? In what way can you imagine this will work?
Right.
Because it's easy to say no. That's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
It's find a way to say yes. But under what conditions can you say yes? Because I started really thinking, if you have everything that you've ever wanted, you're comfortable, you're never going to be innovative.
No. No, not at all.
So, and trying to get them to realize the transition from Office 365 to Google Workspaces, they just think it's just all about, email. And I'm like, there's like the reason why I like Google so much is that they did everything with the thought of search
it.
and through a browser. And so that way you had to collaborate. They started with collaboration in mind, whereas Microsoft started with, no collaboration, and now they're trying to Frankenstein collaboration onto it.
And I'll defend Microsoft a little bit. Microsoft also started at a time when being connected to the internet wasn't important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
True.
And so,
you may be the only person that's ever defended Microsoft, by the way.
Well, I'm not like I said, I'm pretty agnostic. I believe like you do. If you have under 300-400 people in your company, there's no reason not to use Google. I mean, especially now, like with Google Vault and some of the other things they're doing. I mean, you've got a great product, and it's funny because we use Google Workspace where I'm at now, and because we have it's all engineers and artisans, right? The first thing they're up is in the search box.
Yep.
Right. Whereas, and so you start off with using the product correctly, and that's why I tell people all the time. I go, if you start off with the fact that Google, the primary reason they formed the company in the first place was search. Every decision they make about design cues and everything is based on the fact that we do search really well. And if we start with that, we can search the entirety of the internet. We can search the entirety of Google Workspace. We can search the entirety of everything you personally curated onto our platform.
Yep.
Right. Or we can do all three at the same time.
Yeah. And the funny thing is when people will tell, like, especially the junior people, like, oh, just big companies can't do it. I'm like, well, I guess someone should go tell Whirlpool that it just doesn't work.
Go look at the list of people using Google Workspace. I think,
or how about the financial institution that's 3 times our size, that's right across the street from us, that they switched over to Google Workspace back when we were at Silent Circle. They did it in like 2015, and it wasn't anywhere near as good then as what it is today.
It was secure. It just was not feature rich.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I don't like you and I both agree with that is the same thing. But when you start talking, when people it's either two things. One, they've not contemplated, people don't contemplate doing something that's extremely difficult for them personally, or they don't contemplate the organization they're with supporting making that, right? And I think, I think one of the things is, as a SEAL, like a mentality that pervades the community, and some guys that are big public speakers and everything and written books that are SEALs have articulated this concept. It's the what if I can concept, right? There's a guy, David Goggins, he's great, got a great message and like that. He showed up. There's only been, I think at the time when he went through Buzz, there was only 35 African Americans that ever made it through SEAL training, right? And we can talk about why that is and why I think that is, right? But his mindset when he showed up and he was demonstrably overweight. Now he's an ultra marathoner. He's a badass physical specimen, right? And he's got a great message. And but his thing is like, what if I can be 36? Right? And so you develop this mindset of, hey, when things really suck, what if I can do it? right? Not if, hey, this is never going to work out. I'm never going to be able to do it. And here's the thing, like, and everybody in their life, and you know, it doesn't happen when it's convenient for you. It happens when it's convenient for the world, right? Or the universe has had to at some point get punched in the junk and take adversity, right? And the people that are ultimately successful, whether it's going to be 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 years to get back on track, ultimately keep plugging away, right? And it might not be out every day cheerleading for themselves or anything like that. And some days there's going to be darkness and it's going to suck because you're like, what the fuck? I'm not, you know, I can't do this, right? But it's even if you're bitching about it internally or externally, you're still making steps forward, right? And so there's what I'm doing that's positive. There's the energy I'm pushing the bus forward with, and then there's, hey, I have to vent, right? But as long as you keep that, hey, I'm not, hey, it's, you know, yeah, it's bad, but look around, there's a lot worse, right? And I think when you start, you know, especially like when you look at something like SEAL training, you know, it's we look at quitting as like, how quickly do you want to be comfortable, right? And I think a lifetime of achievement is defined by a lifetime of discomfort, right? You can't, in your being, you can't sit still, right? You can't go, okay, I got this done, I got to go do the next thing, right? And that next thing might only be one step, but guess what? Every time you take one step, the curvature of the earth changes, your aperture changes, your view changes, right? And so now you can make more informed decisions about things you might not have contemplated because you didn't see that before, right? And I think it's largely, I call it the Medal of Honor mentality. If you read the citations for quite a few of the Medal of Honors, dudes were getting shot at, abject. They were sitting in a hole getting shot at. They were pinned down, and one person will stand up and start walking towards the fire, and you know, he shot 3 machine gun nests. You know, some of the ones from World War II are just amazing. It's incredible, right? And but what's the common theme? They understood that if they stayed where they were at and did nothing, their life and circumstance wouldn't change. And they said anything is better than doing nothing.
Yep.
Right. And once in life you develop that anything is better than doing nothing, you can ultimately be successful.
Absolutely. You know, going back to the routines, I have another one, and a lot of times, you know, especially the missus kind of questioned it. Now gets it. But
You
I,
have a
you know,
foul line in your house you step over all the time?
no. So I was when playing baseball, I would purposely mess up the foul line, just because I'm like, I don't, you know,
And then
this
that's
isn't
why
going
you
to change.
then that's why you tore up your ankle. You angered the baseball gods.
Maybe that could have been.
They're like,
uh,
oh, keep kicking it. Good
yeah.
job. Good job, boy. Keep kicking it.
So when I would have a really good day, I'd bring out the nice bottle of whiskey and pour an ounce and have some. But I also did it when I had a really, really bad day. And so I was asked, like, well, you didn't have a good day today. I said, you're right. But I do this because inside, it's a remembrance that I've had better days. I
Right.
know what to do. I know this too shall pass.
Right.
I I really take to heart, you know, when you know, Kipling says, you know, treat your success and failures as the same two imposters. Like you can't dwell on your success and you can't dwell on your failures. Take a
Right.
moment to celebrate, take a moment to cry, whatever it is, but then forget it and move forward, because it doesn't matter. Anything that happened is in the past. You can't change any of it. And then I also like if something hasn't happened yet, I'm not going to worry about it because I don't know how the universe is going to come together to make those things happen. And so it's a waste of energy, especially my negative energy, to think about all those bad things that can happen. Because I go, but what if they don't?
Right.
What if the
Well,
good
that's the same
happens?
thing. Like, why not me? Right.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
you know, that's the, you know, it's only been 35. Why can't I be 36?
Yeah.
Right. And the prevalence of that mentality is, I think, the difference between however someone defines success, the difference between failure and success, or even worse, the lifetime of mediocrity of just, I did the minimum, I'm not a burden on society, but I'm not really additive to society. Right. And when I say additive to society, you don't have to affect millions of people. Every day have a net positive effect on one or two people, and they're going to do it, and they're going to do it, and so on. Right. That, I think, is, creating that environment in your life, whether it's personal life or professional life, is hugely important. Right. Because that's, when it's how people view you, right? It's your business card, so to speak, right? When show up and you're smiling, you're talking, you actually take the time to learn somebody's name, and how many times somebody, like, they shake your hand, then they don't say your name back to you, right? I'm a lot of times, if I met him, I'm like, all right, Dan, nice to meet you. Why? Because I'm cementing that in my brain, because it's courteous, right? And to know everybody that you work with, and I think there's we've both walked around with CEOs that, like, you walk in a room and he's like, hey, who's that guy over there on the left? Well, you talked to him 3 times last week.
Yeah.
How do you not remember his name? Right. And that's when you start to look at net givers and net takers. Right.
Absolutely. We do our new hire orientation, and so, of course, when I do my part, it's always remote. I'm never really in front of them. Because they're always in a different building where they do the new hire training, even when we were all in office. But what I've always done is I ask them to kind of introduce themselves, and I'll say welcome. I'll be like, okay, nice to meet you. But I write down their name and where they're sitting, so that way,
Yeah.
I can, because I have a hard, one of the reasons why I always, when I introduce myself and I say their name, is I have a hard time with names. Just remembering names until after I've had a couple of interactions. But I always want to constantly say their name, so that way I don't do it, because I know it's just it'd be better, it would be better if I could just assign everyone a number, but that tends to be frowned upon when you give them, like, numbers.
Yeah.
Inmate
Or
number.
comment on something about their appearance.
Yeah.
The Wild Hairdo was I can't remember the movie. The guys are really things like, you flock of seagulls, come here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, no, that doesn't work.
Yeah, they don't like that. So I had to find a different way of doing it. And so I would just say their name, at least try to say it twice, as the nice to meet you. And then, as I would be ending, well, hey, Dave, really good chat, and I've got to go do something else,
Right.
whatever. I try to say it at least twice. It helps. It helps me, at least.
No,
Because I think it's appropriate. I mean, you don't want to. It's showing proper respect to the people. I defer with, I'm going to give you the respect that I feel is warranted, until you've proven you no longer get respect.
Right. I always say, everybody in my life starts out at a 4.0. You've got to work your way down.
Yeah.
Right. Because you and I both know people that everybody starts out at a 1.0. Everybody's a dummy until somebody rises above that. And then you think, it's like, well, no, that's not true. Right. Is most people everyone shows up to do the right thing. Sometimes they just don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of being a leader. That's part of being the person that's identified themselves and said, I want to help other people. Well, a lot of times it's like pointing people in the right direction. And a lot of that is, hey, when you get to a new job, you think, whatever level of leadership you are, is, hey, define what the road looks like. Here's where we're going. Right. And be open to somebody telling you, hey, that road's going to be really bumpy. There's got to be another fork in the road that we can take that's going to smooth things out. But I'm a big believer in, I don't have to tell you, I need to give you some end state, or some, here's the first hurdle as a group we need to do, or here's things we need to accomplish. And don't be so heavy-handed telling people what to do. All right. Tell them, hey, here's what the goals are. Let's go get them together. All right. And one of the hardest things for leaders to do, people in general, right? There's two, it's kind of a double-edged sword. One is to give compliment, and then to take it, because a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and people feel uncomfortable because, to a certain extent, everybody's like, I could have done better. Right. And people that want to be successful, and people that work hard, they always understand there could be something better. Right. And they could have done. And I think by almost to the point of discomfort, complimenting people, that what you're telling them is like, hey, where you're at, you're doing like, yep, personally, I know you want to be better, and so do I, and we're always doing that. But hey, the effort you put in is appreciated, right? Because it's that is, I think that's hugely important in life. You don't have to go around kissing everybody's behind all day long, but you have to let everybody know that you are legitimately concerned about their welfare, and that the effort they put in is appreciated, right? And whether as a parent, because friends of mine that they're like, yeah, I never heard my dad say I love you growing up. Like, I can't imagine not doing that as a parent. Right now, my parents would always share that sentiment with me, right? So I grew up in an environment where that was considered to be, the norm. And I have a buddy of mine who had a terrible home life growing up, and he's, at first people are like, man, that guy is stupidly into his family. Like, he's really like, for all of us. So I think most SEALs are pretty good dads, for no other reason than we're gone so much that when we're home, we're really focused on the kids. And it's hard. Like after 9/11, that was really hard, because when we come home for a short period of time and then leave, it's like even though you're home, you're not really present, because you're thinking about the next, what I got to do. Right. But team guys, there's some incredible dads, whether it's coaching baseball, all that, all the little things that, I don't have time for that. But, come to find out, he had this incredibly rough childhood with adverse parenting and everything like that. And he's like, I don't ever want my kids to experience a minute of that. Right. And that's a positive way to kind of put that out in the universe, because a lot of people are like, hey, that's the way I grew up. What's good enough for me is good enough for my kids.
Well, I always say, you're going to learn. You can either learn from a good example of a bad example,
Right.
or and you can choose to, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do that. And the converse is true. You may have had a great parent, and you might have taken that for granted as a child, and then neglect. So you could either, you could take the pause and take it, I'm going to keep repeating it.
Right.
And I think a lot of it comes down to choice, and it always comes back down to, unfortunately, I feel that majority of people just want to take the easy way. Um, being, for me, when it really hit me when Danny was born. I'm like, at that point in time, I'm like, I am no longer in control of myself, so to speak. That everything I'm doing now is to make sure I put him in the best position possible.
Right.
And it like changed dramatically for how everything I did. That was the pivot point where I said, okay, I need to get back to school. I need to I need to climb that ladder of success. And first thing I need to do is find the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I had to find the ladder.
Hey, I got a question. Where's the ladder of success?
Yeah.
Sorry, where's the first rung?
Yep. Right. And so, but that was the reason why, and that drove me.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
When you found when you found the ladder, was a mentor standing next to it?
In the beginning, no, not in the beginning. It took a while until I found someone that did, and I think part of that is, this just goes back into to some of how I believe. When a student is willing to learn, a teacher will appear.
Right. That's why I was going to ask you. Most people are fumbling around, and they haven't given of themselves to say, hey, I'm surrendering to learn. Right. I don't know what I don't know. Right. There's unconscious incompetence, meaning I don't know what I don't know. There's conscious incompetence, meaning I know what I don't know and I'm trying to get there. Then there's conscious competence, meaning as long as I'm focused and diligent, I can be successful. And then there's that unconscious competence, right, that everybody's saying. And I think the transition from conscious incompetence to conscious competence is largely driven by the individual saying, I'm not going to be ignorant anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But to transition out of that into unconscious competence, that's when mentors really start to appear. Because they're on, hey, somebody's on the path. They're not just tired of where they're at and want somebody to give them all the answers. that person is dedicated and diligent. I want to help them. I want to help them get the rest of the way.
Yeah, and it happened when I was at XM Radio, and Frank Patry was in charge of all of IT. They didn't call them CIOs back then. At least it wasn't a common term, but essentially that's what he was. And I'd had conversations with him all the time, and it really kind of drove my immediate boss kind of crazy because he always kind of felt like I was just going over his head on things, and I'm like, no, we just started over having a cup of coffee and then just
Yeah.
talking, and nothing really about anything else. But one day, because I absolutely put together a perfect plan and executed on it. And I was 25 years old, but part of that was when XM Radio was built, you had all these people in traditional radio, and so they built everything like they did in
Yeah.
the radio world.
Through that lens.
Right, everything was in a 19-inch rack, and we had these Cisco 6513 switches, and all of it was the Cat 5e cables, and so you couldn't take these switches in and out because you're supposed to put these things in a 24-inch rack with a 19-inch recess kit, so you have enough room for cable management. What do I know? So I'm like, this stuff's not going to work. If there's a failure, you're not getting a blade out in 4 hours, let alone the entire switch if the backplane goes. Oh no, we do this stuff all the time. Oh, really? Okay. Well, we had a bunch of switches fail because I don't know what genius thought it was a good idea to, in a data center, keep the doors open and do construction inside there. Because last time I checked, moisture, dust, and electricity don't mix.
No.
Well, these switches
Never have, never will.
Yeah, these switches were going, they were going kaputs quite a bit. So much so that Cisco said, we're not giving you another switch until you buy another switch, because we replaced all of them, sometimes twice, just because of this. Well, now these things are failing. They're seeing that to get rid of one blade, you had to take out this whole switch, and it was like 3 guys all day long to do this. And so I pointed all these different things, and we're supposed to go live September 12th, 2001. Well, we didn't, but that was the plan. And
that's a hard day to go live with anything.
Yeah. Well, this was
day after 9/11. We're going to do something. That's a hard,
Yeah. Well, the date was picked well before 9/11 happened.
No, I know. I completely understand that, but you just want to talk about the disfortune of, hey, we're going to do this, right?
Yeah. So I worked, and this is where I really started to push my own personal envelope, but I only had 6 weeks to get this done, because if we're live, we can't have a switch offline for that long and be single threaded. And so I put together the plan. I had even the CFO coming in helping to run cable in the data center, because we had to do things in a very perfect way with all the stuff going on. And so of course, after all that, I was definitely walking around like I owned the place. And
come on.
Yeah. And Frank kind of pulled me aside one day, and he's like, you're my highest maintenance engineer I have ever had. And I'm like, what? Because now the other part of this was, I'm like, what are you talking about, Frank? Like, you don't ever even have to come to any of my meetings, because I handle like everyone else. You're like, I must be invited to the meeting. You're like, with me, just go do it, because that doesn't mean you're not high maintenance. And then it started to kind of dawn on me. He's like, look, you pulled off that particular plan well, but what are you going to do next?
Right.
And that's already happened. So it got me thinking, and then eventually it's translated into, do you want to be the superstar engineer, or do you want to be a leader?
Right.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, you're going to get to a point very soon to where you're going to have to make a choice. Otherwise, the money won't make sense for you, because you'll have this money and then you'll not be able to transition into that management/leadership role, because you don't have any management experience, and you're going to have to start back down and the money is going to go down. So you're at a point to where, right now it's parallel. You switch over to the side and you hate it, you can always go back, but it's hard
Right.
to go the other way. And I'm like, well, I want to be this superstar engineer. And he's like, well, name me a CEO that is a superstar engineer. I'm like, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. He's like, great, there's two. Now, you think you're in the top 1% of the 1%?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, and I don't think so. He goes, take a look at all the CEOs of all these other technology companies. They're not the engineer. So, that knocked me down a couple of rungs, and got me thinking as to, well, at 25, 26 years old, that was tough lesson.
But it's better to have that lesson at 25, 26 than 45 or 46.
Yeah. But it definitely helped the drive, and that's when also I was going to school full time, and did all of this stuff at XM, which was there were some days that I don't actually remember driving home. It was
Right.
and actually that was the only time I have ever had, like, at that point, only time I ever had a manager like yell at me. And it wasn't because of me doing something wrong. It was, and it was Frank. He goes, I have a hotel room for you right across the street. You drove home. That was the stupidest thing you could do. Like, he was angry, not because I didn't take the hotel. He's like, you have a wife, you have a child, you put all of that at risk when you could have just gone over there and slept. Because if I was up for, there was many times during that whole span, it was 30 plus hours at a time. I think the
Right.
longest I went was like 52 hours without sleep doing all this stuff. And right around that 30-hour mark, you do start, at least for me, you start to kind of see some crazy things that may
Right.
not be there.
That
But
have nothing to do with work and or your family. Right?
yeah, right. But it was, looking back, it was absolutely stupid. But I just was like,
You saw Elvis and Hank Sr. all in the same thing, trying to get out of the server to sing at XM radio.
yeah, well, and Biggie was there, and Tupac. I mean, it was all
Exactly. Yeah.
and because I was like, I just wanted to sleep in my bed. When that whole thing was done, I woke up, and it's 8 o'clock. Thought I just had like a night's sleep.
Yeah.
No, I slept for an entire day. I lost an entire day, because I slept for 24 hours.
But you came back bigger and better than ever.
Oh
But
yeah,
I think, when you talk about, and it's one of the things when people talk about this generation of young people is, oh, they're not willing to do all that. I don't think that's true at all.
I
I
agree.
think it's what happens when you push a young person into the real world, whatever age that is, right? When the safety of home and school, those controlled and semi-controlled environments, that there's very little risk, right? And risk at my age and risk at 22 and 23, they're two different things, but people feel them the same because it's the breadth of your life experience, right?
Yeah, sure.
But when you ask of people, right, and people want to be successful at whatever that is, that's when they start to do things like that, right? What about me? Like, why not me?
Yep.
Right? And I always, it's a great line that Ernie, he's a guy, he hosts NBA, the NBA program on TNT, and he has a special needs child that he and his wife adopted, right? That's, to me, is, you want to talk about, is it Dusty in here? It's one thing, if you give birth to a special needs child and everything that you have to do to help, and this child is largely an invalid and everything like that, but they knew that going in and they did it anyway, right? And there's great parents and everything like that. And one of the things he says that I truly believe this in life, you have to find get to things, not got to things, right? I get to do the job I have right now, right? And I truly believe that. I love the folks that are at the company. It's an unbelievable team of engineers and artisans. They're great culture people. They're better humans, right? And I get to do that. If you start going, hey, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, maybe it's time to look around and do something different, right? Or you're just not having the appropriate gratitude for the gift you've been given, right? And I think the older people get, the less they forget it, the less they are appreciative of the gifts they've gotten, because there becomes a certain sense of entitlement,
Yeah, I
right?
think that's true. You've coined the phrase at least several times. Embrace the suck, because no matter what's going on, there's going to be a part of life that's going to be a struggle, and you need to embrace that. And those are the things that you got to do. Embrace the
Right.
struggle in order to be able to get to do all the things that make life rewarding.
Well, I think, I think the difference between successful and less than successful people is what you do when you got to grind,
Yeah,
right? Everybody wants to show up and get the accolade, win the trophy and stuff like that, right? I mean, in sports, it's, like Kobe Bryant used to say, like he'd practice. There's a great story, Jay Williams, who played in the league for a little bit, but he got a terrible motorcycle accident and it limited his career. When the first year he was in the league, he went, they're out in LA. And so he goes to the gym to practice. And when he gets there, Kobe's there and he's already sweating. He's not just shooting around. He's like doing moves, practicing and everything like that. Jay Williams is in there for an hour or so. At the end of it, is untying his shoes and Kobe's still out there. Right. And then goes out, after being in the gym for 2 or 3 hours before the game, goes and drops 45 on him. Right. He went up and he goes, he did a motivational thing with the University of Alabama football team. He goes, every day of my life, I was working so that when I played the game, I wanted to make all my opponents rethink their career options for wanting to play professional basketball. Right. And in loving the grind and loving the work, right? It's easy in athletes, right? Because you can either tell who the gym rats are and who they aren't. Right. And and if you get to play the games, right? I have a friend of mine who was in the NFL, and he's like, they paid me to practice. I got to play the games for free, right? And that's how he motivated himself to show up every day and to be the best player in the practice field, because he's in the Hall of Fame now, right? And he's like, that happens on the practice field. That doesn't happen during a game.
absolutely true. I mean, that's the part where I talk about those successes for me. Like, I have to get better, right? Otherwise, then I mean, that's for me now as a person in business, and being trusted with leading all of these people. That grind is that 2 hours before everyone else is up, I'm doing things to learn. That's me being a mental gym rat at this point.
Right, but that's saying whatever that looks like. It's easy. A lot of times there's like easier. There's some places where it's very easy to define, like the whole idea of contribution margin, right? And one of the things when I speak at some of these foundations that help military people transition into being civilian, especially the ones like the Honor Foundation, they do great work. Their CEO Matt Stevens is a great friend of mine, and he's crushing it, giving people a realistic view of what they need to do and know and say to be successful once they transition out of the military. And one of the things when I've had the opportunity to speak to them is, you have to level set like where you're at. Like the reason you're a great leader right now is because you understand the business of being a SEAL, right? And you've worked on that craft for sometimes 20, 30 years. Now, when you get out, there's certain immutable concepts of being a leader that'll transition, but there's a lot of that are very industry, and I say that with air quotes, industry specific to being a SEAL, that don't necessarily translate into other walks of life. How willing are you to participate in your own success to learn that? Right. And that is, as I tell guys all the time, is look, you're going to get a lot of interviews. If for no other reason that CEO probably has never met a SEAL before and wants to meet one. So you're going to get it's worth it to fly you into town and wine and dine you and get to talk to you. And hopefully you'll tell him some SEAL stories and he'll be like, it's amazing. Doesn't mean you're going to get a job, because you guys go to school, you get grad degrees now and everything that's available to you online. And even when you're overseas, which I think is fantastic. So you're educated. Now you have to get knowledge. Right. And you got to do the work to get knowledge. And when you and I know, it's like how I built my knowledge base in technology was working at Blackbird every day of the week, where I was doing what? I was teaching people So I had to know the material in a way with a depth and a breadth I never would have contemplated before. And Blackbird paid me well, but it wasn't top dollar, right? I mean, I got paid really well when I was at Blackbird, but these guys sometimes get out with an unrealistic expectation of what they want to make or where they want to enter the system at. They look at, I want to enter the system here because I can make X amount of dollars if I enter here. Okay, well, what are you doing to be prepared? And so contribution margin with sales is easy. I'm putting $1 million number on your head. I'm going to pay you 100,000 or 100, 125 base. I'm going to give you 125 other targeted earning component. And if you make your number, it's very easy to see that you were the contribution. How do you define contribution margin? To pick the best developer, to pick the best business analyst, right? That's a little more nuanced, right? And so what I ask of people when we're talking like that is like, hey, I want to give you everything we can give you and more, but what do you believe your contribution margin is right now? Here's what we're paying you. What do you like? How do you translate that? And I said it's very hard if it's not something as black and white as sales, right? And what do you feel you're contributing to the business, right? To the team, to the group, however you define that. And I think a lot of it's that unrealistic expectation that comes with, well, I've gotten this degree. All right. Well, right now, that tomatoes are fruit. You're not smart enough not to put it in a fruit salad, right? You're not knowledgeable enough. Right. And I think that is when you start as a leader and as a mentor, as everything that goes along with, I think, high functioning leadership is how quickly can I get all of my people to be knowledgeable? Because in that knowledge, then it allows them to go do things that are far beyond their expectation.
Absolutely. Before we close off, is one of those things you talk about contribution. I wanted to put out there. I've got a friend named Gentry who is battling stage 4 cancer right now. He's 47 years old, and it's a rare form of appendix cancer. So and I bring that up because if it wasn't for Gentry, I may not have my doctorate, because him and another friend, Eugene, that both worked for Good Technology at the time, helped me in performing all of my experiments on there. So if anyone out there gets a chance, I've put out there the link in the chat. Donate some to Gentry, because the health insurance isn't covering any of this stuff, because he's got to go out of country to do any of these experimental treatments. And it's talk about contribution. He definitely is a guy that gave way more than he ever received. He gave everyone that's ever met him all of his time, and so I'm continue to pray for Gentry and his family. He's a great man. So. I'm really hoping he pulls this through, because everyone that's met him, always, he always likes him. I don't know that he always likes everyone that he meets, but everyone that meets him always likes him. So, anyway, TK, is a pleasure again.
As always, my friend.
I will talk to you, I'm sure, soon.
Yes,
have a great week, everyone. Thanks for stopping by. Enjoy your week, and for those that are in Maryland, it's your last weekend of crabs. After Labor Day, can't have crabs anymore. All right, everyone. Take care.
Crab cakes and football, right? That's all Maryland's known for.
That's
crab
it.
Cakes and football.
Absolutely.
I'll talk to you later, my friend. Have a great week.
You too. Take care.